This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to The Holistic Survival Show with Jason Hartman. The economic storm brewing around the world is set to spill into all aspects of our lives. Are you prepared? Where are you going to turn for the critical life skills necessary to survive and prosper? The Holistic Survival Show is your family's insurance for a better life. Jason will teach you to think independently, to understand threats, and how to create the ultimate action plan. Sudden change or worst case scenario, you'll be ready. Welcome to Holistic Survival, your key resource for protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jason Hartman.
It's my pleasure to welcome Sam Jacobs. He is the lead writer and in-house historian for ammo.com and has a lot of information about off-grid living and forming communities, all-important communities, and just all kinds of good stuff. Sam, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's good to have you. So tell us kind of what's at the top of your list nowadays. We're in a pretty scary, quickly changing environment, I think, and a lot of people are pretty worried, as they should be.
So I think that, at the top of everyone's list should be remaining calm and reasonable. And I think that there's a lot of reasons to be afraid right now. But I think that even in the most dangerous situations, it's important that everyone kind of keep their heads about themselves. So when you go to the grocery store, pick up some extra stuff. When you make a buy of something that you're going to need, pick up some extra stuff. Always good to have, some little extras, but keeping your head about you is important because, if things go really, really bad, no amount of, canned goods is kind of going to prepare you for it.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, that's probably a good segue to community and forming communities, which is something you're a big believer in. I agree with you. Tell us about that. I mean, what steps should somebody take to be prepared in terms of the network they have?
Well, first of all, you need to be somewhere that is, you don't want to be caught in any kind of disastrous situation and be, in a deep blue part of the country. I love some of the deep blue parts of the country, but they are not where I would want to catch myself during any kind of supply chain disruption or a disruption in the electrical grid or anything like that. I think that it's a lot easier to form the type of community that you want to live in for personal resiliency and personal freedom in areas that, we commonly refer to as red states. Even within those, you're going to want to look for the places that are more right-leaning, more conservative, more libertarian. I think this kind of goes beyond the law and into a cultural phenomenon, one of which is that, everybody likes to beat up on Californians coming to their states, but in a lot of cases, the Californians are refugees. They're not invaders. And we have pretty compelling evidence that it was transplants to Texas who saved Ted Cruz in his reelection bid against Beto O'Rourke. So, you want to find yourself somewhere that, you're going to have allies, you're going to have like-minded people, you're going to have similar values. I also think that just simple things that you might take for granted, depending on where you live, like respect for private property, respect for property rights. There's nothing to stop, the state of California or the state of New York or these types of, deep blue states from deciding that property you have is illegal, that it's unfair that you have more property than other people. And so we're taking some of yours. I just don't, I don't think that there's a lot of upside to remaining in blue states anymore.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think we are in a time where, oddly, I never thought in my lifetime we would see any significant amount of, I'll use the phrase, political risk, where you really are in serious political risk the way people in turbulent or developing countries are around the world. In the U.S., we've always had the good fortune of not really having this problem, not really having to think about this. But times they are changing, huh?
Yeah, and everybody talks about Florida, which, I think Florida looks great. I'm not a fan of humidity or large bugs, so it's probably not the place for me. But you've also got Texas. I think has a very promising political landscape in the future for people who want to prepare for minor to major catastrophes and disasters, and just are people who are pro freedom in general. I think kind of the dark horse in all of it, though, that I would recommend to people is Arizona. Arizona just, not a lot of laws in Arizona. Your property is pretty much yours. On the flip side, you will find a lot of covenanted communities, property owners associations, things like this that are going to, kind of step in the gap between, the lack of law and your desire to maintain your property. So, and I think that there's other options as well. But if you're still hanging on for dear life in, California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oregon, somewhere like that, I feel for you. But I think it really is time to start looking somewhere else. And I think you'll be, happier and better off for it.
Well, a lot of the smart people are leaving those places, so that's true. But, it's interesting that you pointed out Arizona. I lived there for 6 years. Do you consider Arizona to be, it turned purple in the last election. Do you consider that to be a very good libertarian state? Or what were you saying? Just dive into the Arizona thing a little bit more.
Well, to kind of lay my cards on the table, I do not accept the election returns as being legitimate. So I should just put that out there to begin with. However, that's not to hand wave away your question, which I think is, valid and legitimate. I think that the situation in Arizona is in flux, as it is everywhere. But the situation in Arizona, I think, is one where, first of all, I would argue that the best guy in Congress is Paul Gosar, and he's out of Arizona. I think that Arizona needs a better governor, and I think that Arizona needs better representation in the Senate. But I think that overall, the state of Arizona is very attractive Arizona has constitutional carry, which, among other things, and I talk about this in an article I published on Substack, but constitutional carry, among other things, means that liberals don't want to move to your state because it's not that they feel unsafe or any of this nonsense that they tell you. It's that it's deeply offensive to this quasi-religious value that they have, that guns are evil and dangerous and no one should have them. And then there's a state where you don't need a permit to carry concealed. I think that Texas's abortion law works in a very similar way, probably much more effectively for that matter. But I think that there are a number of things about Arizona that are unattractive. Frankly, I think there's a lot of things about Arizona that are just unattractive to people, like the fact that it's 115 in August. But I also think that there's a number of things about Arizona that make it unattractive to liberals and thus make it resilient. I think that the election results, I don't think, can be completely hand waved away, but I do think that there's a lot of nullification in Arizona. A lot of sheriffs who at least claim that they are not going to enforce unconstitutional gun laws.
Right. Okay, got it.
Who did not enforce COVID restrictions.
Right. Okay. So the premise is, though, things that will repel leftist ideology and leftists moving there, you consider that good. So yeah, I get it. Okay, that makes sense. Hey, but remember, it's all the gun's fault, according to Alec Baldwin, right? He didn't pull the trigger. This logic is so ridiculous. It's just, you can't even make this.
Literally, the first rule of gun safety.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
but we don't live in a logical world anymore. We live in a crazy world. Oh gosh. Okay, so be around people that are somewhat like-minded, and you'll find it easier to form community bonds. And what do you do with that? Tell us how that plays out in a disaster scenario. whether it be economic collapse, natural disaster, where there's chaos, or hey, BLM or whatever, right? How does this play out? How does the community act together? What do they do? Just give us some insight into that.
Well, here's a really simple example. How do old people get around if there's a disaster? Or how do they get the things they need? Is probably a better way of putting it. They're reliant upon others to do this. Mm-hmm. So, in any kind of calamity, disaster situation, you're going to have immediately, there's going to be people who just simply cannot take care of themselves. This is one reason for the need of a community. Another is that, you and 10 of your neighbors looking out for each other is a lot stronger than all 10 of you only looking out for yourselves. So how do you kind of, prep for that? I think a lot of it is just finding ways to be civically engaged in your community in ways that make sense for you and make sense in your community. I think that, to use a super obvious example for me, school board, with the school board revolts going on right now. If you feel inclined to run for school board, you should do so. If you don't, you should be attending school board meetings and following the politics of that and, finding out who is the person who's going to run for school board and keep critical race theory and gender ideology out of public schools. Getting involved in local politics. I think getting involved in local civic organizations. You don't think of the volunteer firefighter department really even as being a thing, but it is. And in fact, they're desperate for young men because a lot of the people who do it tend to be older. So this is a place where you can go, show that you're of value to the community, be of service to your community. Both of these things, I think, by the way, are good in and of themselves. Yeah. But they have the benefit of not insulating you from disaster, but giving you some resiliency and anti-fragility in the face of a disaster. Because, you may have been Joe Blow good neighbor, but now you're Joe Blow good neighbor who's on the volunteer firefighter department and his wife's on the school board. And, I think that building social capital, particularly in smaller communities, is important. But I think that the big first step you got to make is you just got to surround yourself with people who share your values, because people who share your values are people that even people that you don't like, you are going to be able to trust more in any kind of disaster situation, because their values aren't, take whatever you can get into the devil go the rest. I mean, I think that living in those kinds of communities is an important first step, but then it's important to get involved in them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how can someone be more independent in terms of, living off the grid, not being dependent on infrastructure? It's pretty disconcerting to hear about how unprepared our infrastructure is, for example, for electromagnetic pulse problems.
Right.
We all now know in the modern world what a supply chain disruption looks like. And from what I understand, all those transformers for our grid are made in China.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the electrical grid is my number one concern. I mean, it's why I prep to the degree that I do, because I'm not some guy up in a shack in the mountains sitting on 500,000 rounds of ammunition or anything like that. I have a couple extra weeks worth of food and a couple extra weeks. Well, I have probably several months worth of water, but I'm not a super over the top prepper guy, but the EMP is my main thing. So I think is the main reason that I prep. So I think that, you've really got to have a generator. You really got to get yourself a solid Yamaha inverter generator. They're about $800, I want to say. I don't get any kind of kickback from them or anything. It's just the one I have. I like it. It works really well. There you've got power.
Why do you need an inverter generator just versus, like, I have one that was about $430 or something like that?
There's nothing wrong with yours. It's just cleaner power. I'm a buy nice, not twice kind of guy. And when I buy stuff, I don't like to go, I don't want the Bugatti, but I want the Cadillac. You know, I want something that's that's a little premium, that I know is going to work, that I know has available parts, that I know has this, that I know has that. I think it, for me, an inverter is important. To just get a standard generator, it's mostly about the quality of the electricity. But you know, if all you can get is a $400 generator that doesn't have an inverter, by all means. You need some kind of power supply, I think is the ultimate point. Also, with the supply chain stuff, I mean, you got to have some kind of extra food around. In terms of off-gridding, I mean, the main thing is, if you're not going to go fully off-grid, you at least need a generator and some solar-powered, you know, solar-powered radio, solar-powered flashlights, solar-powered really anything you can get. You can get a device called a Jackery, which is a little, you know, kind of a little inverter, and it's solar powered. I mean, it'll take you a while to get a decent amount of juice in it, but it'll power your phone. It'll power, you know, little devices and things like that. Just looking at ways to kind of back yourself up from the power grid. Also, if you live somewhere cold, you know, how are you going to stay warm?
I think that's actually one of the biggest things. You just said it right there, is exposure. You know, people do not realize how things change if you do not have heat. I mean, you can die in your own house, okay, with it in a sheltered house, because it can get really, really cold. So, are you able to, you know, cover yourself and maintain? You know, do you have this in your car too? Because what if you're somewhere else, right? So just simple exposure issues, I think, are really, really important. And by the way, back to the generator just for a moment. When I bought my generator, I'd never owned one before, and I've never had to use this one, but I live in hurricane territory, so I thought I should get one. I bought gas cans, and I also bought a siphon because I don't want to store the gas in cans, but I'll almost always have gas in my car, right? And so I can siphon gas out of the car, and it uses regular gas. So have a siphon, you know, for $20. I think that's really important to have that as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that you hit on there is that, you know, it's important to think outside the box a bit on this kind of stuff, because there's things that, you know, if you have the space for it, and you really want to kind of drill down into stuff and be prepared, is, you know, there's things like safety pins, clothespins. Everybody learned about toilet paper, you know, last year. There's all kinds of things that are going to be necessary, even in a temporary disruption, say 3 weeks to 3 months. For me, like when people talk about gold, I'm thinking like ammunition. You know, and on a total.
I think ammunition is much better than gold. Gold, it is useful if a complete disaster occurs and a new economy gets rebuilt. That's going to be months down the road. Okay, that is not going to be anything quick.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you want to stockpile something, ammo is kind of probably the best thing that you can stockpile. I mean, I do work for an ammunition company, but like. In terms of durable tradable by the goods.
Would it be 9mm? What would you recommend?
You can't really go wrong with 22 because everything is food when you have 22. You know, that's a big one. 223 is important if you live somewhere where you're going to be encountering wild boar or javelina a lot. But 22 is going to make just about everything into food. And then if you live somewhere where there's, you know, elk and deer,
you need something bigger. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
But why 22? Why is that the ultimate hunting rifle?
For me, it's you know, and I'm not a great game hunter or sportsman or ballistics expert by any stretch of the imagination. But for me, the reason why 22 is, it's just small game, you know, like everything is food with a 22. Squirrels are food now. And I think that's kind of for me, you know, that and 223 would be the tradable goods round.
Yep. The 223 and a mini 14 is a pretty good setup. Yeah. Okay. What else should people know? What's your second favorite thing to stockpile for trade or use?
For trade? Cigarettes.
Or use, yeah. I was thinking that. I was thinking cigarettes, coffee, vodka, those kinds of things.
Well, the coffee's all mine. No one's getting my coffee. Try my coffee from my cold dead hands after the apocalypse. But I have, coffee is definitely one that I've thought like, man, I would trade a lot of something for coffee. But, vodka like keeps forever. I mean, I'm not a drinker, so I wouldn't keep it around. But like, cigarettes, as much as I hate to encourage anyone to smoke.
Yeah, right. But there are people with addictions who will trade those. So
yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that people often leave out is like, you're going to want some cookies and some pancakes and some muffins when, there's no power for 2 weeks at a time. So I think remembering those kinds of things. I think that also, if you live in a community where other people are doing these kinds of prepping activities, you can always get together and say, okay, I've got the vodka, you've got the smokes. Right. There's no need for redundancy on some of these kinds of items. So, I mean, this is another area where the community aspect comes into play. And also, if you live somewhere with any kind of LDS, Latter-day Saint population, they have canning facilities that are open to everyone. So if you want to get into canning, that's a way I always, tell people about, because a lot of people aren't aware.
But that's another example of how in a place that is a blue left-leaning place, nobody's going to be prepared and everybody is going to try and take what you have. But in a right-leaning place where you have LDS all around, everybody's going to be prepared. So society does not collapse in that environment, right? Because everybody has what they need. They've done the homework. They've done the prepping. It's just a much more stable, lower risk environment.
And it's much more like, I mean, if you're involved in your community, like really, I cannot stress enough that like you should just look around your community for opportunities to be involved that fit with your skills and interests. That's it. Because they're out there, the firefighter department and the school board, those are just kind of too low hanging fruit, but they're out there. But the thing that this gives you an into is that in these kinds of situations, if there's some sort of mass social disruption, what you have is the beginning of some kind of, I don't know what else to call it, but like an emergency committee, because it's like, you call Joe, who calls Jack, who calls Mike. And all of a sudden you guys are in a meeting and you've thought of 4 other people that you need to call to get in and go, okay, we need to take care of X, Y, and Z. Mrs. Henderson needs her whatever. And, we're going to put all the kids here and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Spontaneous order will come out of any kind of calamity, but you can really prepare yourself for it by living in these smaller communities where people are like-minded and where you really know your neighbors, and you've shown yourself to somebody who's willing to be of service, somebody who has value in the community. These things cannot really be overvalued going into any kind of disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sam, wrap it up for us with any closing thoughts, anything we didn't discuss that you want to say. It's all yours.
Yeah, so I work for ammo.com, and you can get $20 off any order of $200 or more by going to ammo.com/podcast. I also run a news aggregator that you can find at news.libertasbella.com. And you can find me on Twitter and Substack at samjacobs1776. I write a lot of cool stuff on Substack. And I also have a podcast that you can find on my Twitter. So thanks for having me.
All right, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.